Fox News alert. It's day 3 of the U.S. blockade against ports in Iran. CENTCOM says so far, no Iranian ships have breached it. Maybe this warning had something to do with it.
Do not attempt to breach the blockade. Vessels will be boarded for interdiction and seizure, transiting to or from an Iranian port. Turn around and prepare to be boarded. If you do not comply with this blockade, we will use force. The whole of the United States Navy is ready to force compliance. Now,
President Trump says we may be getting closer to a deal after signaling peace talks could restart in the next few days.
I think it's close to over here. I mean, I view it as very close to over. You know what? If I pulled up stakes right now, it would take them 20 years to rebuild that country. And we're not finished. We'll see what happens. I think they want to make a deal very badly.
The White House is turning up the economic pressure today. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says more financial pain is on the way for Iran.
We have told countries that if you are buying Iranian oil, that if Iranian money is sitting in your banks, we are now willing to apply secondary sanctions, which is a very stern measure. And the Iranians should know that this is going to be the financial equivalent of what we saw in the kinetic activities.
And that pressure is already adding up. According to the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, the blockade itself could cost Iran $435 million a day. That's from lost export revenue, mainly from oil, along with disrupted imports. That works out to roughly $13 billion a month. Joining me now is the man behind that analysis, Miad Maleki, who joins us now. Miad, thanks for being with us here today. So, that kind of money, $435 million a day, tell me the impact on Iran.
Thanks for having me. So the impact, as a matter of fact, has started already. By closing the Strait of Hormuz, they have started putting that pressure on themselves. Listen, I think Iran's economy is the most vulnerable economy to a closure of the Strait of Hormuz because they depend more than any other economies in the world on the flow of commerce from the Strait of Hormuz. 90% of the commerce goes through the Strait of Hormuz. And by closing the Strait of Hormuz, they started the damage to their own economy. Now with the blockade, what's going to happen is they can't get their oil out of the Strait of Hormuz. And what is going to cause within, looking at the numbers, I think they have probably around 13 to 15 days of storage that they can store the oil that they're extracting. After that, they're going to run out of the storage capacity. They're going to have to drop their oil extraction, and that's going to cause permanent or long-term effect to their ability to go back to extracting oil.
So I assume that means they can't pay their forces, they can't restock their ammunition, they can't do all the things that they need to if that kind of economy is grinding to a halt. I would also assume that means at some point the life on the citizens who are already suffering massive inflation becomes harder, and then perhaps a bigger prospect for street protests and perhaps an internal revolution?
That's exactly right. So what's going to really start this pressure domestically is that gasoline is one of them. They produce about 103 million liters a day of gasoline. They need around 130 million liters of gasoline a day. And they're going to run out very soon, probably within a few days or a few weeks. Historically, every time they increase the price of gasoline, they face major, uprising domestically. So it is going to put significant pressure domestically on their economy. And here's another thing: they have shut down the internet for about 49 days now. That's a major economic blow that they're taking. That's around $50 million a day in economic effect that they're getting just because they're afraid of Iranians organizing street protests, and then they're going to have to face another round of protests. So the internet is down, and they're taking more economic blow because of that.
Life in Iran is about to change drastically over the next 2 weeks, perhaps the next couple of days. What does that mean for the regime? We'll have to see this play out in Iran. Miad Maleki, thanks for being with us here today.
Thanks for having me.
All right.
President Trump announcing that America is closer than ever to the end of the conflict with Iran as his blockade on the Strait of Hormuz chokes the life out of the terror regime's economy, completely halting economic trade going into and out of Iran by sea. Now, according to CENTCOM, listen to this, 10 vessels have complied with turnaround orders and 0 ships have broken through since the start of the U.S. blockade on Monday. Here's the president speaking to Maria Bartiromo.
Is this war over?
I think it's close to over, yeah. I mean, I view it as very close to over. You know what? If I pulled up stakes right now, it would take them 20 years to rebuild that country. And we're not finished. We'll see what happens. I think they want to make a deal very badly. If you told me that we were going to be at only 92 a barrel, $92 a barrel, I would have been very surprised. Gasoline's coming down very soon and very big.
So you think gas prices will be lower before the midterm elections?
I think they'll be much lower before midterm, much lower.
Meanwhile, the Democrats are still doubling down on their desire to see Iran win this conflict. Virginia Senator Mark Warner is now suggesting that America's the bad guy here.
In so many ways, 46 days in, America is less strong, and the Iranian regime, which is, by the way, more radical than it was before, can, on some level of truth, say, we just took on America and Israel and fought them to a tie, although maybe even more than a tie. Looking at how we are viewed around the world, we have spent 75 years trying to say, with all our flaws, and God knows we've got a lot of flaws, we were the good guys. We don't have that claim anymore.
A lot of Iranian talking points proliferating, Jesse.
The United States has never been stronger, and I've never been more proud of the Navy. We came in, they said there was a quagmire, they said we had no strategy in the street, and we took 2 missile-guided destroyers and sailed them right up the gut, right down the middle, miles off the coastline, and Iran didn't do anything. They said they were going to do something, they did nothing. They sent 1 drone, we knocked it out of the sky. Right now, we're doing some demining operations, and guess how many mines we found, Kaylee? 0. The Iranians were bluffing. So we're going to continue the demining operations to create a little safe passageway for these other foreign tankers. And once that's over, we do a few escorts and we hand it off to the NATO navies. Iran is closed for business completely. They can't sell anything to anybody else. They can't buy anything from anybody else. And if you notice, there's not a lot of stuff built in Iran. Okay? So, especially after we bombed all their steel and petrochemicals, they're done. They're going to lose about $500 million a day. All their oil wells are going to probably blow up in about 3 weeks. They can't store it. And China can't suck up all that cheap sanctioned oil anymore. And sooner or later, Xi Jinping is going to call the gay Ayatollah and say, no mas. And that's what you see happening here. And right now, we have 3 aircraft carriers about to be in the region. 10,000 more Marines who can either do boarding, seize card, coastal assaults if they get cute in negotiations. And negotiations are pretty simple now. The only leverage they have once they lost the Strait is uranium. And it's buried under the rubble. We're keeping a close eye on it, and they haven't moved it yet. So the market loves the blockade. We've already recovered all the losses since the start of the war. The S&P just hit an all-time high today. Oil futures are in the 80s for June delivery, and gas here at the pump is down from last week's highs. I'm sure it'll go much lower. I'm not saying this thing's over, but this does look like, and anything can happen, that Trump is about to stick the landing, and we'll just pray it happens.
You know, and Dana, you did have Caroline Levitt today say nothing is official until you hear it from us, but we feel good about the prospects of a deal.
Well, I think that the economic pressure, obviously, it's just like here, right? What people think about their pocketbook. And so that's true of the Iranian regime as well. So because they don't care about their people were basically had no money. They were starving. And the Iranian regime said, oh, how about we give you $7 more a month? And the people said, heck no. And then when they protested, then we know the rest of the story, unfortunately for them. But this actually hurts the regime. Because then, as Jesse was saying, if you're losing $500 million a day, like, you can't operate, and that it doesn't take very long to hurt a regime in that case. I do hope that if they decide to meet, that it's not meeting just to meet, that it's meeting to say, you are going to agree to our terms, and we will meet with you. And if they're just going to come and try to drag it out, I wouldn't meet, and I would keep the pressure on, as I think that they are saying that they would be willing to do. I think President Trump on Sunday, this is just 3 days ago, called into Maria Bartiromo's show and said the gas prices might be lower, they might be the same, they might even be higher. And then today he said they're definitely going to be lower. I don't know if I would promise that, but the trajectory would be, yes, that would seem to be the case. But one last point here on American energy independence that we enjoy versus what other countries have to deal with is that some of them are saying, being told, work from home, don't drive, turn out your lights. They're figuring out a way to do everything they possibly can all throughout Asia because they are more dependent on the energy from this region. Is more proximate to them. China gets 73% of its oil from the region. So it does hurt them as well. So there's incentive to try to get this done. And if China is doing anything, hopefully they are telling the Iranians, get with the program.
Yeah, and the blockade, to Jesse's point, does appear to be working. We gave you the numbers, but I want to play this from CENTCOM. CENTCOM put this out, and this was a warning sent to the Iranians. It's really interesting. Listen to this.
Do not attempt to breach the blockade. Vessels will be boarded for interdiction and seizure, transiting to or from an Iranian port. Turn around and repair and be boarded. If you do not comply with this blockade, we will use force. The whole of the United States Navy is ready to force compliance. Now.
Jessica, the reason I play that is because previously the Iranians have not understood words. They didn't understand Joe Biden saying don't, hence October 7th. They didn't understand Barack Obama and the deal, hence the violation of the deal. They understand that because you have a president that's used hard power and used force.
Sure. Listen, I hope that we end up with a very sparkly deal and that everybody on our side gets what they're after and that we can return, frankly, to some of the original goals that we had before the goalposts were shifted very dramatically down to what Secretary Rubio was talking about, which are called the skinny goals, like the Skinny Inflation Reduction Act. And maybe that's possible. But at this point, it sounds like you're still pretty far apart with the 5-year offer from the Iranians. Apparently that we asked for 20 years, which wasn't even satisfactory for President Trump in terms of the enriched uranium. So I wish you the best of luck, right? And for the people who are going in, and I think Dana makes a really good point that you shouldn't go just for the sake of sitting there and looking like you're trying to get to a deal. You should keep up force and pressure and make them really serious when they do come to the table. But, we're all focused on the Strait of Hormuz, which is the critical choke point in this conflict at this moment. The Strait of Hormuz was open before this happened. So we're blockading the blockade that came into existence because of the thing that we did. So we're essentially just trying to undo our work. And Donald Trump sits there with Maria Bartiromo and he says, it'll take them 20 years to rebuild their program. Do you remember what people were saying about what happened just over the summer with Fordo, right? Their nuclear program was obliterated. There was no possibility of rebuilding it. And then just a few months later, we were back to they're going to have, 11 nuclear bombs in a matter of weeks or whatever it was that Bibi Netanyahu was saying. So we're obviously getting some mixed signals here about what they can do. Mark Warner, the point that he's making about the regime, I think is important to consider because we're not doing regime change anymore in the way that the Israelis were hoping to. It wasn't an ideal scenario to have the Ayatollah's son take over, who we all agree is more of a hardliner. But the Wall Street Journal did a deep dive piece today on what the regime will look like afterwards. They have the former head of the Iran desk for the Israelis who said the war changed the regime and not in a good way. We created a reality that is worse for the Iranians that they were facing before the war. And this new national security chief, Mohammad Bagher Zolgadar, I probably mispronounced that. He was a former Revolutionary Guard commander. Apparently, he was so extreme that when he was in charge, Soleimani actually quit for a little while. The guy that we took out, that President Trump, he begged like a dog. I think that's what he said about it. He was so violent and so extreme that Soleimani was like, I'm going to take a little breather from working from this guy. So we are leaving in place, if we get out now with a deal, a regime that is much harsher than the older Ayatollah that we had before this, and that's important to consider.
Yeah, a lot of ifs there, and Greg, regime change was never the goal, but a non-nuclear Iran is the goal.
Yeah, none of that stuff means anything to us. The Strait of Hormuz was open before. Well, that's because Iran had the power to keep it open and close it at will. Now they don't. They have closed it before, but now they can't close it. That is gone. You can't pretend that the last 45 days didn't create a global change that is so positive. I would almost call it, Jessica, dare I call it, a sparkly victory. Yes, it's a sparkly victory. I like that. I'm going to use that from now on. The only people who were right about this were the people who said, I don't know anything, and the people who said, do not trust the judgment of people who said Joe Biden was sharp as a tack, the laptop was fake, and the border is secure. If you had those two positions at the beginning of this 45-day affair, you would look like Nostradamus in a Miss Cleo fright wig. You were dead on, because you are right. Now, you filled in all those gaps of uncertainty with faith because you saw how Trump acted before, and you said, you know what? I think he probably does know what he's doing, but he's not going to tell the press that is in a cycle of hysteria. The thing about Warner is, if stuff in Iran is bad for us, it's good because it's bad for Trump, forgetting that it's still bad for us. It is the Trump America First alignment problem that has been vexing the left forever with every 80-20 issue. What is good for Trump is good for America. If we want something bad for Trump, then it has to make America suck. So, and it's vice versa. So if you feel great that Trump is screwed in Iran, then you also must accept that America is screwed as well. But that's hard to do when you're faced with such a lopsided contest. Jesse points it out, Iran's nearly militarily finished. And the leaders that are left, I mean, you're talking about as though they are scared to death of each other. If one of them cuts a deal and the other one doesn't, this one dies. It's the prisoner's dilemma writ large, where mistrust is going to lead to tremendous consequences. I don't know how they get into that. Add to the fact that the media cycle has been replaced by a hysteria cycle. Hasn't affected us, maybe Jessica, but not me. But you know who it affected? Europe. The hysteria cycle turned the entirety of Europe into losers. They followed our press, and they didn't help out a friend. You know, as customers around the world flock to the United States for oil, what is England doing? What is Spain doing? What is France doing? I firmly believe that we should take the Falklands back. Even though they weren't ours, but just to teach England a lesson. Like, you know what? Who helped them on the Falklands?
And then give it to Argentina. Then give it back to Argentina.
Yes, yeah. We helped England get Falklands, and they said, fuck off. No. So the thing is, why do so many people hate America first? If it's not just Trump, it's also the underlying concept of being mean, that they see the planet as everybody working together. They have no clue that every other country would do exactly what we would do if they could, because a good leader leads their country first. Even, you know, as much as you hate a certain leader, that leader is trying to operate for his country, unless they're like complete despots, you know, whatever. It would be nice if other countries were as good as America. Then we wouldn't have millions of people clamoring to get in. So I think it's pretty funny that the anti-American left refuse to account for the world actually thinking we're better than they are.
That's a very sparkly point, Greg.
Thank you.
Yep. The sparkly victory. I love it.
You said sparkly as a denigration of something that is truly majestic. It really is majestic.
Oh, sparkly is embarrassing to say, but majestic about a deal that doesn't even exist, or a conflict that.
I'm talking about the last 45 days.
It's been majestic.
Kinda, yeah.
Okay.
Kinda, yeah.
We have different definitions.
Tell me what is not amazing.
Don't get her started.
I know, but she will have to try very hard.
No,
That's why she had to pivot away from Straits of Hormuz. Look, Trump let all the midwits gorge on passed around opinions and just sat there and got it done.
Yep.
It's already done.
That you would say that all of our allies don't even have their own intel, which, by the way, we were mad because they weren't going to share with us anymore.
We got to run, but
you know what's not majestic, though? How much your gas costs.
There you go.
Well,
you didn't care about that when Biden was president.
Actually, I did.
We can actually show you why your gas is going up.
We know why.
We still don't know why gas went up under Biden. Why was it?
It went up because there was a global health pandemic. Oh, well, yes, because of hunters.
Jessica, we gotta run, but something that would be truly majestic would be for your colleagues to root for the sparkly deal that you're rooting for. So
Thank you. A U.S. blockade is choking off Iran's ports in the Strait of Hormuz, squeezing Tehran's economy by an estimated $435 million a day. One former Treasury official says it could all push people back into the streets against the regime?
It's very difficult to predict how long the Iranian people are going to put up with the economic failure and the crisis that already exists in Iran and is just going to be exacerbated by the effect of the blockade. I think in a matter of 2 months, we're going to see regime really reaching the point of not being able to pay salaries and riots in defections within the regime.
All right, let's bring in Dr. Sheila Nazarian, who fled Iran as a child during the Islamic Revolution. Welcome to you. First, can I get your thoughts on what we just heard there?
I think it's absolutely correct. I think President Trump is the first president that understands that delay tactics and negotiations with this terrorist regime can be used by us also, not just them to get what they want, but by us to get what we want. So saying, negotiations are ongoing as he squeezes the regime economically is the exact right move to make to really weaken this regime, not just on a military level, but also on an economic level, to allow for the Iranian people eventually to rise up and take their country back.
Yeah, this as we are also learning that Iran is set to execute the first woman over the widespread anti-regime protests and demonstrations that we have seen. This is Bita Hemati. Just get your thoughts on that as we have her picture up on the screen.
The regime uses executions, public executions, as a way to intimidate, traumatize the people, and it's nothing new, Sandra. Iran has been at the top of the list for executions year over year per capita for many years. And they're starting to step up these public executions, 1 to 2 beautiful young people who are a full life unto themselves. They execute them to oppress everybody else and say, you know what, fear us, we're still in charge. But it's just so devastating for us to see our brothers and sisters in Iran being used as a oppression tactic by this terrorist, monstrous regime. For us as Iranians in the diaspora, this isn't just an economic issue. It's not just taking out, terrorist regime and their proxies. This is a humanitarian issue. And it breaks our hearts every single day, and it's why we are fighting as hard as we're fighting here in the diaspora.
Yeah, as you well know, Bita is one of an estimated over 1,600 sentenced to death by the Islamic Republic in the past year. That number is climbing, estimated to be now 1,639 lives. You can see what it has jumped from in just 1 year. I want to play out Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, held a briefing in the last hour, and she said this as far as an update.
I saw some reporting, again, bad reporting this morning, that we had formally requested an extension of the ceasefire. That is not true at this moment. I've also seen some reporting about the potentiality for in-person discussions again. Those discussions are being had, but nothing is official until you hear it from us here at the White House. But we feel good about the prospects of a deal.
But the message continues to be, this is very close to over. I'll get your final thought on that.
Again, I just think that these negotiations, quote unquote, we all know you can't negotiate with terrorists. We have learned that from the Iranian negotiations for the last 47 years. They just use it as a stall tactic to continue doing whatever evil it is that they want to do. For President Trump, I believe these negotiations are diplomatic cover for eventually taking the Strait of Hormuz and not allowing this terrorist regime to have any sort of grip on the global economy, and to allow a weakened regime so that the people of Iran can rise up and install regime change.
Dr. Sheila Nazarian, we do appreciate your time today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Women protester could face execution in Iran after being sentenced to death for involvement in an anti-regime uprising earlier this year, back in January. The human rights activist news agency reports Bita Hemati is accused by the regime of disrupting national security, and that her husband is also among the more than 1,600 Iranians facing death sentences right now. So with that, we bring in Sardar Pashayi, a former Iranian national wrestling champion and former head coach of Iran's national wrestling team. His father was a dissident and a political prisoner, and Sardar says he could not go to his parents' funeral for fear that he would be arrested as well. Sardar, welcome. Thank you very much for being here.
It's good to see you, Martha.
Good to see you, too. Let's put this picture up again of this woman. And as we look at her picture and we think about this, let's remind everyone of the number of executions that have happened in the past few months in Iran, according to Human Rights Monitor. 656 executions by the Iranian regime in just the past 3 months, 341 in January. You can see the numbers as we go down the list here, and this is while Iran was offline. So the suggestion is that the real numbers are much, much higher than this. What's the impact on people who are living in Iran, maybe wanting to see an overthrow of the regime when they see this story?
I really appreciate you, Martha. You always give to voiceless people. The people need help, and they are in a difficult situation. The regime wants to send this message that whoever stands against this regime, this is the price that they pay. Even in the middle of war, they managed to execute athletes, people, women, prisoners. Yesterday we had a news that another athlete got executed. Fortunately, today he made a phone call with his family and he said he's alive. You can imagine how much pressure these families, these people, every single of us have to face for every single prisoner, and unfortunately this is a true face of the regime that we face.
So when you hear the White House talking about returning to the table over the next few days and reaching some kind of resolution, and that this regime or the people in charge now, you know, so many of them have been wiped out, obviously, but that they're maybe a little bit more able to deal with these people at the table, what would you say about that?
First, Martha, I want to tell President Trump that do not give any chance to this regime. Give the chance to the people. You know this regime, this same people that they are sending you a message. They try to negotiate with you. They're the same people who wanted to assassinate you, to assassinate Americans, you know, target Israeli, you know, Western citizens. We cannot trust them, and I know you know them very well. But if you make any deal with them, if you negotiate with them, all of our requests from Iranian people is please include humanitarian causes. So when they're talking about they should not build a nuclear weapon, it should come with they should not execute any prisoners. Right now, Martha, I brought a picture of 4 other, I don't know if you can see them in the camera. This is the girl that today is facing execution, and the other 3 women have been in prison facing execution. They can be executed any moment. President Trump, you can save the life of this woman if you make a red line for Iranian regime telling them that you cannot execute. If you execute any of these women, any of these prisoners, you will pay a big price, and the head of judiciary system will be taken out. This is the demand, and you can change the life of these people. So I'm hoping that you include that one.
Okay, thank you for that. You know, with regard to this blockade and the impact on the economy in Iran, which is already in such desperate shape, do you see the possibility that riots break out when people have no internet service, when food isn't coming in, when they're, you know, could they topple the regime just on the desperation that may kick in with this blockade?
I mean, Martha, people are under a lot of pressure. They have tried everything, you know, they came to the street peacefully, demonstrated, but each time the response was bullet, prison, and execution. So I think the situation is very difficult, but I think we have been talking together before. The biggest fear for them is the regime survive, and I hope the international community, we see the end of this regime in 2026.
So your message to the people negotiating is to attach human rights security to these negotiations from the regime. And we'll be watching. Sardar Pashayi, thank you very much. Good to see you again.
Thank you, Martha.
And we thank him for standing by with us. Thank you very much for that, sir. Please do give us your thoughts as we do continue to cover the White House, as we just heard from Treasury Secretary Bessent. The press secretary and others continue to put off what appears to be an optimistic tone that they're getting somewhere with Iran. Your thoughts?
I think there are causes for optimism. This blockade that President Trump has put in place is delivering two real benefits. One of them is diplomatic and the other one is economic. On the diplomatic piece, closing essentially this blockade of Iran comes at a time when the Iranian regime is facing an economic collapse. If you look at their economic picture, inflation is the highest in the world at 50% annually. Their currency has lost 97% of its value, and its economic growth is functionally zero. With the military operations plus the blockade, the Iranian regime doesn't enjoy the space to continue to stonewall against American negotiators. And so this is going to force the Iranian regime to come to the table. And Sandra, when you played that clip earlier of the spokesman for the Iranian regime, these guys are singing a very different tune. Over the past couple of weeks before the ceasefire, there was a lot of propaganda. Now you're hearing from the regime that the talks are ongoing. That is a signal that these talks are real and substantive, and I think there is a case for optimism. On the so that's on. It's interesting how the blockade helps both economic, because it calms a lot of the oil markets. That's the economic benefit, and I think there's a very good diplomatic benefit to this as well.
Yeah, as you were saying that, oil actually, after being up most of the trading session, just dips negative for a few seconds there, and it's pretty much flat on the day. This, as if we can toggle to it, the S&P 500, which is our gauge for the our broadest gauge for the American stock market, is right now hitting record highs. I mean, that's pretty fascinating, Brian. Not just the highest since the war began. I mean, the highest that our American stock market has ever been. The S&P is topping 7,000 right now. This is President Trump in that new interview with Maria Bartiromo. Here he is in his own words on the state of this war.
We've beaten them militarily, totally. The only thing they have is the Gulf, and I think now we're the Strait, as they call it. And I think now, I don't know how they hold out. I view it as very close to over. You know what? If I pulled up stakes right now, it would take them 20 years to rebuild that country. And we're not finished. We'll see what happens. I think they want to make a deal very badly.
So to quote the president, we'll see what happens. I'll get a final thought from you, Brian.
I think the president's right. I don't think the Iranian regime has much of a choice. I think historically they've come to the negotiating table and they've done it in bad faith. Now I think this economic crisis that they're facing and the fact that President Trump turned what was an asset for the Iranian regime, closing the strait, he's now turned it into a liability for the regime. I don't think the regime can absorb an economic blockade because they're facing a cash crunch. So my expectation is that they are going to come to the table, and then ideally we'd work out the nuclear piece, the Strait of Hormuz, the missiles, and that would be a terrific agreement if we can accomplish it. And I think the president's in a good position to do that.
Got it. Brian Hook, thank you very much for joining us. Appreciate it. Don? All right, with that ends the White House press briefing with Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, and Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, and the Small Business Administrator, Kelly Loeffler. Some news there, John. The next round of talks will likely be in Islamabad. Also, the White House report addressing reports that the U.S. has requested a ceasefire extension. That is not true, says the White House, and also adding that conversations with Iran are productive and ongoing.
But as Peter Doocy was saying, there may be this idea of another 2-week extension, not that the U.S. has requested it, but maybe mutually agreed to. We'll see. I also thought it was interesting that they showed the rendering of the new arch. It's going to go in Memorial Circle right there on the other side of the Memorial Bridge, 250 feet tall, which makes it taller than the Arc de Triomphe. But here's the question I have. The rendering I saw did not have a rooftop balcony where you can walk around like the Arc de Triomphe does in Paris, because that is one of the great tourist destinations. They got to work that in. You got to be able to go up and look at D.C. from up there. All right, let's dig a little deeper on everything we heard by bringing in the former Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy. You got to have a balcony. Yeah. You got to be able to go through the top. And look
if the president's watching, you may have just changed the.
Let's hope. So listen, gas prices. They're the big topic. Here's what Scott Bessent said about where gas prices will be in the next number of weeks.
I'm optimistic that sometime between June 20th and September 20th that we can have $3 gas again. And as I said this morning too, we are going to be watching the gas stations because they raise prices very quickly when the stated, when the crude oil prices went up. We hope they'll bring them down just as quickly as crude oil prices have come down, which they've come down substantially just in the past 10 days.
So that's the president's potential biggest political liability is gasoline prices. What do you think about what the secretary said?
I think the secretary is 100% right, and he's going to watch them to make sure they come down as fast as the oil price. Last night, the oil price dropped pretty well because you've watched this play that the president made, which I think was extremely smart this week, and do the blockade. That Iran, you're not going to get a tax on every ship that comes through, and you're not going to control it. And then the U.S. Navy going in there, taking out the mines. Every day, we're even stronger in negotiations. That's why I think this will